In the land of waffles, chocolate, and the world's most confusing government, emerged a king with dreams bigger than his country, and a heart, maybe not as big. Meet Leopold II of Belgium, a man who looked at Africa and thought, you know what this place needs? More Belgium. Was he a visionary leader or a villainous tyrant? Well, let's just say, if there was a competition for most evil king ever, Leopold would be the guy showing up with his own cheer squad. But how did a king of a tiny European country end up owning a chunk of Africa larger than his own ego? Was it for glory, for greed, or just because he could? Join us as we delve into the absurd and dark tale of Leopold II, the man who turned exploitation into an art form, and find out why his legacy is as dark as the chocolate Belgium is famous for. The man behind the crown. In the heart of Europe lies Belgium, a country known for its quaint charm, culinary delights, and intricate politics. Yet it's also the birthplace of Leopold II, born in 1835, a figure whose ambition stretched far beyond the borders of his small kingdom. The second son of Leopold I, Belgium's first king, young Leopold grew up in the shadow of a burgeoning European power game, where empires were built on the backs of colonies. Leopold's early years were marked by a rigorous education designed to prepare him for the throne. His tutors filled his head not just with languages and diplomacy, but with a sense of destiny. Belgium, though small, was to play a significant role on the world stage, or so he was taught. As he grew, so did his ambition, a flame fueled by the stories of explorers and the vast wealth that lay untapped in distant lands. Ascending to the throne in 1865, Leopold II found himself at the helm of a country craving expansion, but lacking the means and the opportunity to do so. Europe's map was mostly drawn, with Africa as one of the last pieces of the colonial puzzle yet to be claimed. Leopold's eyes turned to this continent, not just as land to be explored, but as a canvas for his legacy. However, Leopold was also a man of contrasts. Publicly, he played the part of a constitutional monarch, a ruler who respected the limits of his power under Belgium's parliamentary system. Yet privately, he harbored dreams of absolute rule, of a domain where his word was law. It was this dichotomy that would define his rule and his life. His personal life, too, was a study in contradiction. Married to Archduchess Marie Henriette of Austria, their union was more a matter of state than of heart, producing 3 daughters and a deeply unhappy marriage. Leopold's true passions lay elsewhere, in grand projects, in the acquisition of wealth, and, as rumors would have it, in the company of various mistresses. Leopold's reign in Belgium saw modernization and public works, including the construction of parks, public buildings, and the famed Antwerp Central Station. These achievements, however, were overshadowed by his growing obsession with acquiring a colony. The Congo, vast and rich in resources, caught Leopold's attention. It was here that he would leave his mark, for better or for worse. The scramble for Africa. The late 19th century was an era of unparalleled European expansion, a race among empires to claim their stake in uncharted territories. This period, known as the scramble for Africa, saw the continent carved up by European powers, eager for land, resources, and prestige. At the heart of this frenzy was King Leopold II of Belgium, a monarch with neither the largest army nor the most resources, yet with ambitions that far exceeded those of his contemporaries. Leopold's interest in Africa was not born out of a sudden epiphany, but was a calculated move. He watched with envy as Britain, France, and Germany expanded their empires, bringing wealth and glory back to their homelands. Belgium, however, remained a spectator in this global game of monopoly. Leopold was determined to change that. He envisioned a Belgian empire that would rival those of his European neighbors, and he set his sights on the Congo, a vast territory rich in ivory, rubber, and untold natural resources. But how does a king with no colonial experience convince the world that he should own a piece of Africa? Through cunning diplomacy and a veneer of philanthropy, that's how. Leopold presented himself as a humanitarian, eager to civilize the so-called Dark Continent. He organized the International African Association, a front for his ambitions, claiming that his intent was to bring civilization, Christianity, and commerce to Africa. Leopold's lobbying was relentless. He courted explorers like Henry Morton Stanley, and used their adventures to his advantage. Stanley's exploration of the Congo River basin was particularly instrumental, laying the groundwork for Leopold's claims. Under the guise of philanthropy, Leopold had Stanley establish treaties with local chiefs, unknowingly signing away their sovereignty for trinkets and promises. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85, a gathering of European powers to lay down the rules of African colonization, was Leopold's moment of triumph. Through shrewd diplomacy and strategic positioning, he convinced the powers to grant him control of the Congo Free State. The territory was recognized as Leopold's personal property, a vast estate over which he had free reign. Leopold's dream had been realized, but at what cost? The Congo Free State, in theory, was to be a land of opportunity and improvement. In reality, it was a private enterprise designed to enrich one man, Leopold II. The king who couldn't expand his country's territory in Europe had secured a domain in Africa larger than his own country, a domain he ruled not as a constitutional monarch, but as an absolute despot. The Congo Free State, Leopold's private empire. So Leopold II, our ambitious king with a penchant for real estate, finally got his hands on a piece of property that would make any European monarch green with envy. The Congo Free State wasn't just any old colony. It was a gigantic, resource-rich landmass right in the heart of Africa. And the best part? It was all his. No pesky government interference, no meddling parliament, just Leopold and his new massive garden of wealth. But as we're about to see, this garden needed some serious tending, and Leopold was not about to get his royal hands dirty. With the ink barely dry on the Berlin Conference Agreement, Leopold swung into action. He proclaimed himself the sole owner of the Congo Free State, essentially making an entire country his private property. Imagine that, a landmass 76 times the size of Belgium, all under the control of one man. And Leopold had big plans for his new acquisition. The Congo was not just going to be a colony, it was going to be a money-making machine. The king's eyes sparkled at the thought of the Congo's vast resources: ivory, rubber, minerals, you name it. To tap into these riches, Leopold implemented a system that was as ingenious as it was brutal. He claimed all land and resources as his own, forcing the local population to collect rubber and ivory. And by forcing, I mean through a regime of terror that would make even the hardest of hearts shudder. Leopold's private army, the Force Publique, enforced his will. Their methods? Let's just say they weren't handing out parking tickets. Villages that failed to meet their rubber quotas faced unimaginable horrors: hostages taken, homes burned, and limbs chopped off as punishment. The message was clear: meet the quota, or else. But here's where it gets even more oversimplified. Leopold, sitting pretty in his palace in Belgium, managed to convince the world that he was doing the Congo a favor, civilizing the locals, bringing them the wonders of European enlightenment, all while his agents turned the Congo into a hell on earth. Talk about a PR spin. The Congo Free State became a paradox, a land rich in resources, yet its people lived in terror and poverty. Leopold's dream of wealth was coming true, but at a cost that was too horrific to imagine. The king's private empire was built on a foundation of exploitation and suffering, a dark legacy that would soon catch the attention of the world. The horrors unleashed. Now, let's zoom into the Congo Free State, where King Leopold II, our self-appointed landlord of this vast African estate, was about to turn his dream of an empire into an absolute nightmare for millions. If there was a hell on earth, Leopold had just bought the franchise rights. First off, let's talk rubber. The world just couldn't get enough of it. Bicycles, cars, and all sorts of shiny industrial goodies needed rubber, and Leopold's Congo was dripping with it. But harvesting rubber was no walk in the park. It was hard, dangerous work. And Leopold? Well, he was all about maximizing profits with zero investment in worker welfare. Enter the Force Publique, Leopold's personal army, acting more like a gang of thugs than any formal military unit. Their mission was simple: make the locals harvest rubber, and make them harvest a lot of it. The system they used was straightforward yet horrifying. Villages were given quotas, outrageously high quotas, and for every shortfall there was a price to pay. A price in human hands. literally. The force publique soldiers were required to prove they didn't waste bullets on hunting, or, heaven forbid, defending themselves against attacks. Their proof: human hands. For every bullet spent, a hand was expected in return. Villages that didn't meet their rubber quotas saw this policy applied with terrifying zeal, leading to a chilling economy of severed limbs. But the brutality didn't stop at amputation. Hostages were taken, women were raped, and entire villages were massacred for the slightest defiance or failure to meet quotas. The Congo turned into a landscape of terror, where the jungle hid unspeakable horrors and rivers whispered tales of sorrow. Now let's crunch some numbers, and trust me, they're as grim as they come. It's estimated that the population of the Congo was halved under Leopold's rule. While exact figures are hard to come by, conservative estimates suggest that 10 million souls were lost to Leopold's greed. To put that into perspective, imagine wiping out half of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston combined. And all the while, Leopold sat in his palace, counting his profits. The king's wealth swelled as the Congo bled. Ivory and rubber poured into Belgium, funding opulent buildings and monuments, all built on the backs of Congolese suffering. Leopold's Congo was not just a colony, it was a crime scene, hidden from the world's eyes by dense jungles and even denser propaganda. But whispers of the horrors began to leak out, seeping through cracks in Leopold's carefully constructed facade of philanthropy. Missionaries, traders, and the occasional brave soul began to tell tales of a land where human life was cheaper than rubber, where the darkness of the jungle was matched only by the darkness of human cruelty. The awakening and the outcry. All right, so here we are in the Congo Free State, where King Leopold II has been running the show like a horror movie director. Only, this nightmare is all too real. But guess what? The world begins to catch on. You can only hide a horror show of this magnitude for so long before someone says, guys, you might want to see this. Enter E.D. Morel, a British shipping clerk with a keen eye and a keen sense of justice. Morel notices something fishy with the ships going to and from the Congo. They're heading out loaded with weapons and chains, and coming back heavy with rubber and ivory. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. Arms in, riches out, and not a single product you'd expect from legitimate trade. What's going on here? So, Morel gets loud. Real loud. He starts the Congo Reform Association and begins shouting from the rooftops, "Hey world! Leopold's Congo is a house of horrors!" He publishes articles, gives speeches, and basically becomes the biggest thorn in Leopold's side. But Morel's not alone. He's got some heavyweight tag team partners. There's Roger Casement, an Irish diplomat who sees the Congo's horror show firsthand and writes a report that's as damning as it is detailed. His Casement report is like pouring gasoline on the already growing fire of international outrage. Then, there are the missionaries. These folks have been in the Congo trying to spread the gospel, but end up spreading the word about Leopold's atrocities instead. They send back letters, photos, anything they can to show the world what's happening. One such photo, showing a young Congolese girl named Insala staring at the severed hand and foot of her murdered daughter, goes viral in the pre-internet sense of the word, igniting public outrage. The press jumps on board too. Newspapers across the globe start blasting out stories about the Congo's nightmare, painting Leopold as the villain he is. The British government, pushed by public pressure and undeniable evidence, officially protests against the atrocities. Even the United States, which had been the first to recognize Leopold's claim to the Congo, begins to voice concern. Leopold, feeling the heat, tries to counter the negative press with a PR campaign of his own. He commissions his own investigation, which, surprise, tries to downplay the abuses. But the world isn't buying what he's selling anymore. The jig, as they say, is up. The outcry becomes too loud to ignore. The British House of Commons holds hearings. The United States expresses its dismay, and even other European countries start giving Leopold the side eye. The international community is waking up, and they're not happy with what they see. The fall of a tyrant. All right, folks, grab your popcorn because the drama in the Congo is reaching its peak. King Leopold II, our main villain with a penchant for rubber and zero regard for human life, is about to face the music. And let me tell you, it's not the kind of music you dance to. It's more like the ominous soundtrack you hear right before the villain gets his comeuppance. The world has awakened to the atrocities in the Congo Free State, thanks to a global outrage ensemble featuring E.D. Morel's relentless campaigning, Roger Casement's eye-opening report, and a chorus of horrified missionaries and journalists. The spotlight is now firmly on Leopold, and it's getting hotter by the minute. Leopold, realizing he's losing the PR battle, and pretty much any sense of dignity he thought he had left, tries to play the benevolent ruler card. He makes a show of donating his beloved Congo Free State to the Belgian government. "Here, you take it. I'm just a generous guy who's had his fill of ruling," he says, trying to wash his hands clean of the whole affair. But let's be real, he's not fooling anyone. This move is about as transparent as a glass of water. The Belgian government, now the new manager of this African estate, rebrands it as the Belgian Congo. But let's not start throwing confetti just yet. While the most egregious personal abuses under Leopold's private rule end, the Congo is still a colony, and colonies are, by definition, about exploitation. However, the international scrutiny does mean that the worst of the rubber terror comes to an end. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, or rather the royal palace, Leopold is feeling the heat. He's vilified in the press, shunned by polite society, and generally regarded as a pariah. Even his own subjects are looking at him sideways, wondering if their king might just be one of the biggest scoundrels of the 20th century. In a desperate attempt to salvage his legacy, Leopold orders the destruction of Congo Free State archives, basically trying to erase any evidence of his wrongdoing. What atrocities? "I don't see any atrocities," seems to be his motto. But as we all know, the truth has a way of sticking around, especially when it's as horrific as this. As Leopold's health begins to fail, the king becomes increasingly obsessed with his public image and legacy. He spends his last days surrounded by controversy and condemnation, a far cry from the glorious ruler he once imagined himself to be. In 1909, Leopold II breathes his last, leaving behind a legacy tainted by greed, brutality, and human suffering. Leopold's death doesn't immediately fix everything in the Congo, of course. The Belgian government has its own plans, and while the most brutal exploitation practices are curbed, the Congo remains under colonial rule until its independence in 1960. The legacy of Leopold's reign of terror leaves deep scars that persist to this day. The fall of this tyrant didn't come about through military defeat or a coup, but through the power of public outrage and the relentless pursuit of justice by individuals who refused to stay silent. Like a bad movie with an even worse sequel, the story doesn't just end because the main villain kicks the bucket. Nope, the aftermath of Leopold's reign in the Congo is like the hangover after a particularly wild party, painful and full of regrets. When Leopold II handed over his personal horror show to the Belgian government, he probably hoped he'd be remembered as a grand empire builder. Instead, he ended up on the top of the world's worst monarchs list, right up there with the likes of Nero and Caligula. Talk about a legacy fail. But what about the Congo, you ask? Well, the Belgian government took over and rebranded the operation as the Belgian Congo. While they dialed back the most overt horrors of Leopold's private army, the Congo was still a colony, and exploitation didn't just pack up and leave. Rubber and ivory might not have been extracted under the threat of amputation anymore, but the Congolese people were far from free. The international outrage that helped topple Leopold's personal rule didn't magically transform into effective governance. Belgium, now officially in the colonial game, was keen on extracting as much profit as possible, albeit with a slightly kinder face. The Congo's resources continued to flow out, lining the pockets of Belgian businesses and the state treasury. But let's zoom out for a moment and consider the bigger picture. The story of Leopold II and the Congo Free State did more than just expose one man's greed. It shone a light on the darkest corners of colonialism. The global outcry against the atrocities in the Congo laid the groundwork for human rights movements and became a case study in the exploitation inherent in colonial systems. And what about Belgium? For a long time, Leopold's atrocities were a bit like that weird uncle nobody wanted to talk about at family gatherings. It took decades for Belgium to begin reckoning with its colonial past. Museums, monuments, and even the royal family have started to acknowledge the horrors of the Congo Free State. though the journey towards full accountability and reparations is ongoing.